The purpose of this video is to introduce the three main concepts for today, and that is assets, income adequacy, and economic security. But first, I want to ask you to remember how Molly, our good friend Molly Orshansky, designed her poverty thresholds originally. Remember that her goal was to create thresholds of income inadequacy, income that would be insufficient to provide economic well-being for American children. Her thresholds were never meant to be thresholds of income adequacy. And the reason was because she thought it would be easier to get people to agree on the question of how much is too little, rather than on the more controversial question, how much is enough? The question that we're thinking about today is that really the sort of threshold we should be thinking of? Should we really be worried about an inadequacy threshold? Is there something else we ought to care about? So far we've looked at different measures for extreme poverty. Perhaps these are people with an income to poverty ratio of 0.5 or less. Then we've looked at different measures of poverty, from consumption to the official poverty measure to the supplemental poverty measure. And most of these measures are focused on getting people above that threshold from being poor to not being poor. And at that point, most of these measures are ready to sort of throw a party and call it a day. Well, not today. Today, we're going to look at some material from the Economic Policy Institute that really focuses our attention on a level above simply not being poor. And they refer to this level as income adequacy. This is when a person is not just not poor, but when their income is adequate. So as you look at these materials, think about how these two things are different. Not being poor and having adequate income. And then we're also going to look at some materials from Wider Opportunities for Women. These are the basic economic security tables and their report on economic security in America, and they're going to point our attention to an even higher level, and that is having economic security. So as you look at the report from Wider Opportunities for Women and the report on basic economic security, think about how economic security is different from simply having adequate income. Now let's go back to our map. These are our possibilities for poverty measurement. This is all well and good. So far, we have not heard a lot about wealth or assets. We've heard a fair amount about income, and we've heard about standards of living and consumption and expenses. But wealth and assets have not received a lot of attention, and they certainly are completely disregarded in our official poverty measure in this country. Now, just so you know, going into today's exercises, a typical definition of an asset is something you control from which you can derive future economic benefits. Usually, assets are divided into liquid and illiquid assets. Liquid assets are usually financial assets. Money in the bank, stocks, mutual funds, things like that. Illiquid assets are usually movables and durables, things like property, homes, businesses, cars. They can't be liquidated that easily, that is, turned into money really quickly, whereas liquid financial assets can. The only thing we've really heard about assets so far was from Bruce Meyer and James Sullivan with their consumption approach to poverty, and they thought that assets helped to explain the discrepancy between annual income and annual consumption, and between lifetime income and lifetime consumption, because people could draw on their assets when they were in a saving period, when their consumption was less than their income. They could build up assets during that time and use those saved up assets to smooth their consumption when income was lower. So before today's class, I want you to familiarize yourself with the materials from the Corporation for Enterprise Development and come to class knowing several other reasons that assets are important, besides just consumption smoothing. We know they have that role, but what other roles do they have? And you'll want to familiarize yourself with the definitions of these terms before you come to class, and the small assignment that you'll complete before coming to class will give you the opportunity to learn the definitions of these terms. And when you come to class, you should be generally familiar with the differences between the Economic Policy Institute's standards of income adequacy and Wider Opportunities for Women's standards of economic security. Each of them includes slightly different categories, and they use different sources for their estimates in each category. So be familiar with these before you come to class.